Witness, do you remember telling me last night that the only prisoners of war handed over to the police were these guilty of crimes or misdemeanors?
So habe ich mich nicht ausgedrückt, sondern ich habe gesagt, wenn die Polizei Kriegsgefangene aufgegriffen hat, so waren die, die während der Flucht ein Verbrechen begangen haben, wurden von der Polizei, soweit ich weiß, in Haft behalten und nicht in das Lager zurückgegeben. Wie weit in anderen Fällen Kriegsgefangene von der Polizei behalten wurden und nicht zurückgegeben wurden in das Kriegsgefangenenlager, das habe ich zum Teil erst hier aus den ganzen Vernehmungen und Erörterungen gehört.
Would you look at document D569? Would you look first at the top left-hand corner, which shows that it is a document published by the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht?
Das Dokument, das ich vor mir liegen habe, hat links oben folgenden Titel: Der Reichsführer SS und den Untertitel Der Inspekteur der Konzentration.
I'm sorry, they've given you the wrong one. Bring back the document to let me have it. It's a document dated 22nd of November 1941. You got it?
Jawohl, jawohl, ich habe es.
I'm sorry that you were given the wrong document. Now look at the left-hand bottom corner as to the distribution. The second person to whom it's distributed is the Air Minister and Commander-in-Chief Air Force. In 22nd November 1941, that would be you.
Das ist richtig. Dazu darf ich folgende Erklärung abgeben. Bei den vielen...
Well, just for one moment, I'd like to get the document, to appreciate the document, and then make your statement upon it. I shan't stop you.
Good.
Now, I want you to look at the third sentence in paragraph 1. You see, this is dealing with Soviet prisoners of war, you understand? The third sentence says, if escaped Soviet prisoners of war are returned to the camp in accordance with this order, they have to be handed over to the nearest service station of the secret state police in any case. And then paragraph 2 deals with the special position if they commit crimes. Owing to the fact that at present these misdemeanors on the part of Soviet prisoners of war are particularly frequent, due most likely to their living conditions still being somewhat unsettled, the following temporary regulation comes into force. It may be amended later. If a Soviet prisoner of war murders another prisoner of war, is to be handed over to the head of the security police. If a Soviet prisoner of war commits any other punishable offense, the commandant of the camp must hand the guilty man over to the head of the security police. You understand that this document is saying a man who escapes will be handed over to the secret state police. A man who commits a crime, as you mentioned, will be handed over to the security police. Wasn't that the position that obtained from 1941 up to the date we are dealing with in March 1944?
Ich darf auch die Paragraphen vorher nochmal für mich durchlesen, hier keine Sätze aus dem Zusammenhang herausreißen zu lassen.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. It's quite a short document. I thought you might have read it. What are the others? My Lord, while the witness is reading the document, might I deal with a technical matter of arrangement of exhibits? When I cross-examined Field Marshal Kesselring, I put in 3 documents, UK 66, which becomes Exhibit GB 274, D39, which becomes 275, TC 91 276. So this document will become GB 277. Have you had an opportunity of reading it now, witness?
Ja.
Then I am right, am I not, that the Soviet prisoners of war who escaped were to be, after their return to the camp, handed over to the secret state police. If they committed a crime, they were to be handed over to the security police. Isn't that right?
Nicht ganz korrekt. Ich darf Sie auf den 3. Satz im 1. Paragraphen aufmerksam machen. Dort steht, liegt ein Kriegsgefangenenlager in unmittelbarer Nähe, so ist der Ergriffene dorthin abzuliefern.
Yes, will you read the next sentence? If a Soviet prisoner of war is returned to the camp, that is in accordance with the sentence you've just read, in accordance with this order, which you've just read, they have to be handed over to the nearest service station of the secret state police. Follows on from your own sentence.
Ja, jawohl, aber dann die nächsten Paragraphen weisen ja darauf hin, wegen der zurzeit noch besonders häufig vorkommenden Straftaten sowjetischer Kriegsgefangener.
Then, I don't think that quite came through. I'm sorry, the last answer.
Ich sage...
Would you mind repeating it, because it didn't come through?
Jawohl. Ich sage, der 2. Absatz, der gleich daran anschließt, gibt eine Aufklärung wegen der zurzeit noch besonders häufig vorkommenden Straftaten sowjetischer Kriegsgefangener und so weiter. Das haben Sie selbst vorgelesen. Das steht ja im Zusammenhang auch mit diesem Nummer 1 Paragraph. Aber an sich ist dieser Befehl gegeben worden. Er ist auch im Verteiler an das Heer, Luftwaffe und Marine gegangen. Und nun möchte ich die Erklärung zu dem Verteiler abgeben. Es sind in diesem Kriege nicht Hunderte, sondern viele Tausende laufender Befehle untergeordneter Stellen von Übergeordneten herausgegeben und im Verteiler weitergeleitet worden. Das bedeutet nicht, dass nun jeden dieser Tausende von Befehlen und Anordnungen der Oberbefehlshaber vorgelegt bekommen hat, sondern nur die entscheidendsten und wichtigsten. Die anderen sind jeweilig von Ressort zu Ressort gegangen. So ist dieser Befehl vom Chef des Oberkommandos der Wehrmacht ja ebenfalls von einer untergeordneten Ressort unterzeichnet und nicht vom Chef des Oberkommandos selbst.
That order would be dealt with by your prisoners of war department of your ministry, wouldn't it?
Dieses Ressort hat nach dem Dienstweg, den solche Befehle liefen, in solchem Falle den Befehl bekommen und nicht ein anderes Ressort.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to my question was yes. It would be dealt with by your prisoners of war department of your ministry. Isn't that so?
Ich sage ja.
Yeah. It's quicker, you see, if you say yes at the beginning. You understand? I mean, if you don't...
Nein, es ist das hier doch ein Unterschied, ob ich den Befehl persönlich gelesen habe oder nicht. Dazu werde ich noch zu meiner Verantwortung Stellung nehmen.
Well, now, the escape... You were asked whether it would be dealt with by your prisoner of war department. Now, the escape about which I'm asking you took place on the night of the 24th to the 25th of March. I want you to have that date in mind. The decision to murder these young officers must have been taken very quickly, because the first murder was actually took place on the 26th of March. You agree with that? It must have been taken quickly.
Ich nehme an, dass der Befehl, so wie ich später gehört habe, sofort gegeben worden ist. Der steht aber in keinem Zusammenhang mit diesem.
No, we're finished with that document now. We're going on to this, the murder of these young men. A Großfahndung, a general hue and cry, I think would be the English translation, was also issued at once in order that these men should be arrested. Isn't that so?
Das ist richtig. Bei jedem Ausbruch, wo eine solch große Anzahl Gefangener ausgebrochen ist, trat automatisch im ganzen Reich die Großfahndung ein. Das heißt, alle Dienststellen mussten aufpassen, um die Gefangenen wieder einzubringen.
So that in order to give this order to murder these men and for a Großfahndung, there must have been a meeting of Hitler, a Tenerate with Himmler or Kaltenbrunner, in order that that order would be put into effect. Isn't that so?
Das ist richtig, so wie ich nachher ja auch gehört habe und berichtet habe, hat Himmler dem Führer ja auch den Ausbruch als erster gemeldet.
Now, General Westhoff, who was in the defendant Keitel's Kriegsgefangenenwesen, and his prisoner of war set up, says this, that on a date which I think was the 26th, Keitel said to him, "This morning, Goering reproached me in the presence of Himmler for having let some more prisoners of war escape. It was unheard of." Do you say that General Westhoff is wrong?
Ja, dies entspricht nicht den Tatsachen. General Westhoff bezieht sich ja auf eine Äußerung des Generalfeldmarschall Keitel. Diese Äußerung ist an sich unlogisch, denn ich konnte dem Feldmarschall Keitel hier die Vorwürfe deshalb nicht machen, weil er mir nicht darauf aufmerksam hätte machen können, dass ja die Bewachung meine Angelegenheit und nicht die seine war.
You know, one of the defendant Keitel's officers dealing with this matter was a General Inspector, General Rettig. I don't know if you know him.
Nein.
No. Well, General Westhoff, as one can understand, is very anxious to assure everyone that his senior officer had nothing to do with it. And he goes on to say this about General Rettig. He was completely excluded from it by the fact that these matters were taken out of his hands. Apparently at that conference with the Führer in the morning, that's to say the conference between Himmler, Feldmarschall Keitel and Goering, which took place in the Führer's presence. The Führer himself always took a hand in these affairs when officers escaped. You say that's wrong. You were at no such conference.
Ich war bei dieser Konferenz nicht zugegen, auch Herr General Westholt nicht. Er gibt hier also eine rein subjektive Auffassung und keinen Tatsachenbestand.
You see, Westhoff was he was a colonel at this time, I think. Now he was finished as a major general. And he asks that the senior officers be asked about it. He says this: it should be possible to find that that Himmler made the suggestion to the Führer, to find that out from Goering, who was present at the conference. Again and again, Westhoff, who after all is a comparatively junior officer, is saying that the truth about this matter can be discovered from his seniors. You say that it can't.
Das sage ich nicht. Ich sage nur, dass der General Westholt keinen Augenblick, ich sage nur, dass der General Westholt selbst keinen Augenblick anwesend war. Er kann also nicht sagen, ich weiß es oder ich habe es gesehen, dass der Reichsmarschall Goering anwesend war, sondern er spricht, er nimmt es an oder habe es gehört.
What he says is, you know, that Keitel blamed him, as I've read to you, and that Keitel went on to say to him and General von Gravenitz, "Gentlemen, these escapes must stop. We must set an example. We shall take very severe measures. I can only tell you that the men who have escaped will be shot. Probably the majority of them are dead already." You never heard anything of that?
Ich war weder bei dem Gespräch Keitel-Westholt-Kremenitz noch bei dem Gespräch Führer Himmler zugegen. So viel ich weiß, wird General Westholt ja hier als Zeuge vernommen. Im Übrigen muss ja der Generalfeldmarschall Keitel aussagen können, ob ich dabei gewesen bin oder nicht.
Well, then I'll come on. I'm bound to put that to you. I'll come on to your own ministry. I suppose in general you take responsibility for the actions of the officers of your ministry, of the rank of field officer and above, colonel and major general, lieutenant generals.
Wenn Sie in meinen Richtlinien und nach meinen Weisungen etwas getan haben, ja. Wenn Sie etwas gegen meine Weisungen und Richtlinien getan haben, nein.
Well, now, just let's see what had happened in your own ministry. You know that, do you know that Colonel Velder made a personal investigation of this matter at the camp? Did you know that?
Die Einzelheiten über diese Untersuchungen, sagte ich gestern schon, weiß ich nicht. Ich weiß nur, dass Untersuchungen stattgefunden haben.
Now, on the 27th of March, that was the Monday. Did you know that there was a meeting in Berlin about this matter? Just let me tell you who were there before you apply your mind to it, so that you'll know. Your ministry was represented by Colonel Velder because Lieutenant General Grosch had another meeting, and so he ordered his deputy to attend. The defendant Keitel's organization was represented by Colonel von Royermont. The Gestapo was represented by Gruppenführer Müller. The Kripo was represented by the Gruppenführer Neber. Now, all these officers were, of course, not on the policy level, but they were high executive officers who had to deal with the actual facts that were carried out, were they not?
Sie waren keine Exekutivoffiziere, soweit nicht Exekutive im Bereich eines Offiziers ausdrücklich festgelegt worden ist. Zu Ihrer ersten Frage, ob ich von dieser Zusammenkunft gewusst habe, sage ich nein. Den Oberst Welter kenne ich nicht einmal persönlich.
Do you mean to say, are you telling the tribunal that you were never told about this meeting at any time?
Das sage ich.
I just want you to look at it. Let him have Belder's statement. I want you to look at the statement of one of the officers of your own ministry on this point. This is a statement made by Oberst Ernst Belder. And yes, I'm sorry I haven't another German copy, but I'll get one in due course. And it's in my copy, witness, it's at the foot of page 2. The beginning of the paragraph, which I want you to look at, is as recaptured prisoners were not to be taken back to their camp, according to an order issued several weeks previously. Can you find it?
Wo soll das stehen?
Well, in the English version, it's in the middle of the second page. And I want to ask about the middle of that paragraph. I don't know if you see a name. It stands out in my copy, Major Dr. Hohenmörder. You see, it might bring
Ja, jawohl, jawohl.
Thank you very much. Well, now, it's the sentence after the name of Major Dr. Hohenmörder appears. On this Monday, have you got that? On this Monday.
Jawohl.
Thank you. On this Monday, a conference took place at the security headquarters, Reichssicherungshauptamt, at Berlin, Albrechtstrasse. As far as I remember, this conference had been called by the Director of Prisoners of War, OKW Chef Kriegsgefangenenwesen, and I attended as representative of the Luftwaffe Inspection 17, since General Grosch was unable to attend in person, for reasons which I cannot remember. The Director of Prisoners of War, as far as I know, was represented by Oberst von Roermond, while the Security Office was represented by Gruppenführer Möller and Gruppenführer Neber, the chief of the criminal Polizei at that time. I find it impossible to give a verbatim account of the conversation or to state what was said by every single person, but I remember this much, that we were informed about a conference which had taken place on the previous day, that is Sunday, at the Führer's headquarters in connection with the mass escape from Sagan, in the course of which heated discussions had taken place between the participants. In this connection, the name of Himmler, Goering, and Keitel were mentioned. Whether Ribbentrop's name was also mentioned, I do not remember. The Führer was not mentioned. At this conference, appropriate measures were said to have been discussed or taken to check any such mass escapes in the future. The nature of these measures was not disclosed. Later, and more or less in conclusion, Gruppenführer Möller declared that requisite orders had already been given and put into effect the previous morning regarding the search for escape. That according to reports so far received, shootings had taken place at some points for attempted escapes. I think he said that the number was 10 or 15. After these remarks by Gruppenführer Möller, which unmistakably caused a shattering effect, it became clear to me that a decision had been made by the highest authority and that therefore any intervention by subordinate departments was impossible and pointless. Now this was announced at a meeting of persons that I've called executives, that the shootings had already begun. Are you telling this tribunal that this matter was made clear to these executives, including one of your own officers, and was never told to you? You still saying that?
Das sage ich immer noch. Von dieser Sitzung habe ich erstens nichts gehört. Zweitens erwähnt auch hier dieser betreffende Offizier nur Mutmaßungen bei Nennung der Namen. Er stellt keine Behauptung auf. Zum Dritten bitte ich den Eingang dieser Aussage ebenfalls erwähnen zu können. Sie beginnt nämlich mit folgenden Worten. Zu der Angelegenheit der Massenflucht britischer kriegsgefangener Fliegeroffiziere aus dem Kriegsgefangenenlager Nummer 3 in Sagan am 24. 25. März 1944 mache ich folgende Ausführungen, wobei ich darauf hinweise, dass ich infolge Fehlens jeglichen schriftlichen Unterlagematerials gezwungen bin, die Vorgänge, welche nun schon fast 1 3/4 Jahre zurückliegen, völlig aus dem Gedächtnis zu rekonstruieren. Ich bitte deshalb dieser Tatsache und der damit verbundenen Möglichkeiten eines Irrtums Rechnung zu tragen und Verständnis zu haben.
That's a perfectly fair point. And the answer to it is, I'll just show you what this officer reported at the time to his general. Give the witness General Grosch's statement. So you'll see that I think you'll see his memory wasn't too bad. Now this, we're getting reasonably high up. This officer, General Grosch, signs it as a Lieutenant General. Now, would you like, if you could help me again, you were most helpful last time, to try and find the place. This is a statement by Lieutenant General Walter Grosch.
Ich bitte doch, dass ich auch das erst mal lesen kann, um zu sehen, ob nicht ähnliche Einschränkungen vorliegen.
Well, I'd like to, if you'll read the first sentence, I don't want to take up time by reading an account of the general matter. It says, during my interrogation on 7th December 1945, I was told to write down all I knew about the Sagan case, and then he wrote it down. But I'd like you, if you'd leave the first number 1, the first page, do you see at the foot of the page account of the pyramid in your Ministry of Administration? Do you see that at the foot of page 1? Witness, do you see at the foot of page 1 the pyramid?
Ich bin noch nicht so weit, entschuldigen Sie bitte.
Well, comes about the 4th paragraph.
Ich sehe es, aber ich wollte das andere erst hören. Ich bin jetzt bei der Stelle, von der Sie sprechen.
Well, then if you'd look about 4 small paragraphs on, it begins a few days after the day of the escape. I cannot remember the date anymore. Oberst Walder informed me that the OKW had called a conference in Berlin. Do you see that?
What page on the English version?
My lord, it's headed page 4. Oh, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I've turned over 2 pages, my lord.
I've got it on page 4.
On page 4.
Yes.
Could you may take it, witness, that I don't mind you running through it quickly, but you may take it that the first 2 pages are what I put to you yesterday.
Ja, ich bin jetzt...
The administration of your ministry. Now, if you
ja, der Fall Sagan meinen Sie jetzt. Wo steht C, Fall Sagan? Hier.
Thank you.
Welcher Paragraph, bitte?
A few days after the day of the escape. You found that? It's part 3, the 4th paragraph. Yes. when he comes on Part C, the Sagan case, and it's the 4th paragraph. I got a page missing.
Ich habe es jetzt.
Thank you. A few days after the day of the escape, I cannot remember the date anymore, Oberst Welder informed me that the OKW had called a conference in Berlin, I believe on the premises of a high SS and police authority, and that the inspectorate was to send representatives. I should have liked to have gone myself, but had to attend another conference in Berlin and asked Welder to attend as representative. After his return, Oberst Welder informed me that the spokesman of the OKW had informed them that there was a decision by the Führer to the effect that on recapture, the escaped British airmen were not to be handed back to the Luftwaffe, but were to be shot. Then missing a paragraph. Well, you take the last line, the next paragraph. It is, however, certain that the danger of their being shot was even then clearly recognizable. I asked Oberst Welder whether such a far-reaching decision would be notified in writing to the Supreme Command of the Luftwaffe or the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, or whether he had been given anything in writing. Oberst Welder gave me to understand that the Assembly were told that they would receive nothing in writing, nor was there to be any correspondence on this subject. The circle of those in the know was to be kept as small as possible. I asked Oberst Welder whether the spokesman of the OKW had said anything to the effect that the Reichsmarschall or the Oberkommando Luftwaffe had been informed about the matter. Oberst Welder assured me that the OKW spokesman had told them that the Reichsmarschall was informed. I won't ask you about that for the moment. I want you just to look at what your general did. He said, up to the time of the report, I had not received even so much as a hint from anywhere that escaped prisoners of war would be treated in any other way than according to the convention. The same afternoon, I rang up my superior officer, the Director of Air Defense, to ask time for an interview with General der Flieger Förster to be allotted to me. This was fixed for the next morning. That's Tuesday the 28th. When I came to report, I found that General Förster, together with his chief of staff. I asked Förster for permission to speak to him alone and put the facts before him. In conclusion, I expressed the opinion that if the British airmen were to be shot, A, there would be a breach of the Geneva Conventions, B, reprisal measures endangering the lives of German airmen held by the British as prisoners of war would have to be expected. I asked General Förster to bring the matter to the notice of the Reichsmarschall, even at this very late stage, and to stress these 2 points. General Förster was immediately prepared to do this. When it came to the choice of the way in which the matter could be brought to the attention of the Reichsmarschall, it was decided to report to the Under-Secretary of State, General Feldmarschall Milch. In my presence, General Förster rang up the office of the Under-Secretary of State and obtained the interview at once. General Förster left the room, and while doing so, he instructed me to wait for his return in his study. After some time, General Förster came back and told me that he had reported the matter to the Under-Secretary of State and that Feldmarschall Milch had made the necessary notes. Now look at the last paragraph. I gave Oberst Welder the order, despite the ban by OKW, to incorporate a detailed written statement about the conference in our records. So far as I know, this was done. I'm suggesting to you that here was a matter which was not only known in the OKW, not only known in the Gestapo, the Kripo, but was known to your own Director of Operations, General Förster, who told General Grosch that he had informed Field Marshal Milch. I'm suggesting to you that it is absolutely impossible and untrue that in these circumstances you knew nothing about it.
Ich darf zuerst etwas ganz anderes feststellen. Es ist hier in der deutschen Übersetzung seitens des Gerichtes auf den ersten Einspruch von Dr. Stamer in Deutsch Folgendes durchgegeben worden. Als Äußerung des Herrn Präsidenten.
Witness, I don't think the tribunal wants you to discuss legal objections.
You'll please answer the question that's put to you. And you've already been told that you must answer the question directly and make any explanation afterwards and shortly.
Do you still say, in view of that evidence, in view of these statements from the officers of your own ministry, that you knew nothing about this?
Gerade diese Ausführungen bestätigen dies. Und ich darf jetzt eine kurze Erklärung geben. Sie haben ein Datum festgelegt und sagen, das war am 27. Während hier in den Ausführungen von Grosch ein solches Datum nicht zunächst festgelegt ist, sondern es heißt einige Tage nach dem Fluchttage, Datum nicht mehr erinnerlich, meldete mir Oberst Walde. Zum Zweiten heißt es hier, dass der General Forster, der nicht Chef meiner Operationsabteilung, sondern ein Chef einer Abteilung im Ministerium war, dem Staatssekretär Feldmarschall Milch die Sache vorgetragen habe, ohne wiederum auf das Datum Bezug zu nehmen. Der Generalfeldmarschall Milch war als Zeuge hier und ist leider zu diesem Punkt, ob er mir diese Meldung und zu welchem Zeitpunkt und mir direkt weitergegeben hat, nicht gefragt worden.
Oh yes, he was. And General Field Marshal Milch took the same line as you, that he knew nothing about it, that Förster had never spoken to him. It was put by my friend Mr. Roberts. Didn't General Förster speak to you about it? See, what I'm suggesting is that both you and Field Marshal Milch are saying you knew nothing about it when you did, and are leaving the responsibility on the shoulders of your junior officers. That's what I'm suggesting to you. I want you to understand it.
Nein, ich wälze die Angelegenheit nicht auf die Schulter meines Untergebenen ab. Ich stelle fest, und das allein ist für mich wichtig, dass der Feldmarschall Milch nicht gesagt hat, dass er mir das weitergegeben hat, und zum Zweiten, dass das Datum, zu welchem Zeitpunkt Förster Milch Bescheid gegeben hat, hier nicht festgelegt ist. Es ist durchaus möglich, dass zu diesem Datum, wo das tatsächlich stattfand, der Generalstabschef der Luftwaffe mir unter Umständen schon darüber Vortrag gehalten hat. Entscheidend ist, und dabei bleibe ich, dass ich bei dem Befehlsgebung des Führers nicht zugegen gewesen bin und als ich es erfahren habe, auf schärfste Widerspruch erhoben habe. Es war zum größten Teil, wie mir gesagt wurde, zu spät. Dass Einzelne später erschossen wurde, war damals noch nicht bekannt und ist mir auch im Einzelnen des Zeitpunktes nicht bekannt geworden. Die Hauptsache war damals erschossen worden. Zum Dritten, diejenigen Entflohenen, die in der unmittelbaren Umgebung des Lagers von unseren Wachmannschaften ergriffen wurden, sind in das Lager gebracht worden, wurden nicht ausgeliefert. Diejenigen Gefangenen, die von der Polizei und Großfahndung festgenommen wurden und vor dem Befehl des Führers ins Lager zurückgebracht wurden, sind ebenfalls nicht ausgeliefert und nicht erschossen worden.
Do you know that this, according to Whelan, who is going to give evidence, the selection of the officers to be shot, a list as regards the selection of the officers to be shot, a list had been prepared by the camp authorities at the request of Department 5, that's of the RHSA, the Crepo Department, in which those officers were regarded as disturbing elements, plotters and escape leaders, having been specifically mentioned. The names were selected either by the commandant or by one of his officers. Thereupon the shooting of the officers mentioned by name was accordingly ordered by Department 4 of the RHSA and corresponding instructions sent to the Staatspolizei. You telling the tribunal you didn't know that your own officers were selecting the men to be shot on the ground that there were plotters and escape leaders? In any other service in the world, attempt to escape is regarded as the duty of an officer, isn't it, when he's a prisoner of war? Isn't that so?
Das ist richtig und habe ich auch betont. Zu Ihrer ersten Frage möchte ich in aller Klarheit feststellen, dass es sich hier um die Aussage eines Mannes handelt, der noch als Zeuge vernommen wird, ob er tatsächlich eine solche Liste angefordert und gesehen hat. Es ist diese Aussage unlogisch, denn es wurde nicht nach einer Auswahl erschossen, sondern erschossen wurden diejenigen, die von der Polizei festgenommen waren, ausnahmslos, und die noch nicht in das Lager zurückgebracht waren. Es erfolgte also keine Auswahl nach der Auffassung der Störenfriede, sondern diejenigen, die in das Lager zurückgekommen waren, wurden nicht erschossen, und diejenigen, die außerhalb des Lagers von der Polizei ergriffen wurden, wurden auf Befehl des Führers ohne Ausnahme erschossen. Deshalb erscheint diese Aussage vollkommen unlogisch und nicht den Tatsachen entsprechend. Mir selbst ist weder von der Anforderung einer solchen Liste noch der Erfüllung dieses Wunsches das Geringste bekannt. Ich habe selbst den Führer aufmerksam gemacht, wiederholt, dass es die Pflicht dieser Offiziere sei, auszubrechen, und dass sie nach ihrer Rückkehr nach dem Kriege diesen Versuch, soweit ich mich erinnere, in England sogar dreimaligen Versuch nachweisen müssten.
You remember that the government of Germany issued a note about this matter, saying that they had been shot while resisting arrest, while trying to escape. Remember that?
Ich habe erst bei der Antwort dieser Note gehört, dass diese Note in diesem Sinn abgegangen worden ist. Bei der Abfassung der Note bin ich nicht beteiligt worden. Ich kenne ihren Inhalt durch die Rückantwort, weil ich zufällig dabei war, wie diese vorgetragen wurde.
Well, I'm not at the moment on the point that everyone now admits that the note was a complete and utter lie. I'm on the point of the seriousness of this matter. Do you know that General Westhoff says in his statement, "Then when we read this note to England in the newspaper, we were all absolutely taken aback. We all clutched our heads, mad." And that according to Herr Whelan, who will be here, it was a contributory cause to General Neighbour of the Crepo for nights on end not going to bed but passing the night in his office settee. You'll agree, won't you, witness, that this was a serious and difficult matter. All these officers who had to deal with it found it a serious and difficult matter. Isn't that so?
Es fanden nicht nur diese Offiziere die Sache seriös und schlimm, sondern ich selber habe dies als die schlimmste Sache während des ganzen Krieges angesehen und dieses eindeutig und klar zum Ausdruck gebracht und habe, als ich später von der Note Inhalt bekommen habe, auch gewusst, dass diese Note nicht der Wahrheit entsprochen hat. Dieser meine Empörung habe ich ja gerade dadurch Ausdruck gegeben, dass ich daraufhin meinen Generalquartiermeister veranlasst habe, ein Schreiben an das OKW zu richten, dass wir nunmehr die Gefangenenlager abgeben wollten, weil wir unter diesen Umständen nichts mehr damit zu tun haben wollten.
And according to your evidence in chief, what you did was to turn to Himmler, ask him if he had received the order, and then you say, I told him what excitement would result in my branch because we could not understand such measures, and if he had received such orders, he would please inform me before carrying them through so that I would have the possibility to prevent such orders from being carried through if possible. And then you said that you talked to the Führer and he confirmed that he'd given the order and told me why. You, according to that evidence, you still had enough influence in Germany, in your own opinion, to stop even Himmler issuing such orders, or carrying out such orders. Carrying out such orders.
Sie geben meinen Ausführungen eine völlig falsche Deutung. Ich habe dem Himmler klar gesagt, es wäre seine Pflicht gewesen, mich vor der Durchführung anzurufen, um mir die Möglichkeit zu geben, selbst zu dieser Zeit meines weitaus abgeschwächten Einflusses alles zu tun, um den Führer daran zu hindern, dass dieser Befehl durchgeführt würde. Ich habe damit nicht unterstellt, dass ich hiermit einen absoluten Erfolg hätte haben können. Aber es war selbstverständlich, dass ich mich als Oberbefehlshaber der Luftwaffe Himmler gegenüber in dieser Richtung klar aussprach, dass es seine Pflicht gewesen wäre, mich, der am stärksten davon betroffen wurde, vorher anzurufen. Und ich habe auch dem Führer dann in sehr klaren Worten meine Auffassung kundgegeben und habe aus seinen Antworten erkannt, dass ich voraussichtlich nicht einmal, wenn ich es vorher gewusst hätte, diesen Befehl hätte verhindern können. Wobei zur Ausführung und Klärung festgehalten werden muss, dass es sich hier um zwei verschiedene Instanzenwege handelt. Der Befehl ist nicht an die Luftwaffe gegeben worden, durch Luftwaffensoldaten die Leute zu erschießen, sondern an die Polizei. Wenn also der Führer mir gesagt haben würde, ich beharre auf meinen Befehl, den ich der Polizei gegeben habe, so hätte ich nicht der Polizei befehlen können, ihr habt den Befehl des Führers nicht auszuführen. Nur, wenn er durch meine Leute hätte ausgeführt werden müssen, hätte ich Möglichkeiten gehabt, vielleicht den Befehl zu umgehen. Darauf möchte ich besonders aufmerksam machen.
Well, that may be your view, that you couldn't have done anything with the Führer, but I suggest to you that when all these officers that I've mentioned knew about it, you knew about it, and that you did nothing to prevent these men being shot, but cooperated in this foul series of murders. I want you to come to another point, which I'll deal with
David,
quite shortly.
Are you passing from that
Passing
now?
to another point.
Well, you are putting in evidence, these two documents, are
Yes,
you not?
I am. I'm putting them in. I put them to the witness. D731 Velda will be GB278 and D730 GB279.
And should you not refer, perhaps, to the second paragraph in D731?
Yes, sir, I'm sure I should, my lord. I'm sorry about it.
It shows that, apparently, that in the early hours of the 25th of March,
I'm much obliged to you.
the matter was communicated to the office of the adjutant of the Reich Marshal.
Yes, I'm very grateful, my lord. That is so.
In the second paragraph beginning, the escape of about 30 to 40
Yes.
prisoners.
The escape of about 30 to 40 prisoners, the exact number had to be ascertained by roll call, was reported by telephone from the Sagan camp to the Inspection in the early office hours of 25th March. I think it was Saturday morning, and duly passed on in the same way by this office to the higher authorities which were to be informed in case of mass escapes. These were, 1, the office of the adjutant of the Reichsmarschall, 2, the OKW director of prisoners of war, 3, the Inspector General of Prisoners of War, and 4, Director of Operations, Air Ministry. I'm much obliged, my lord. Your lordship will remember that the witness did admit yesterday afternoon that the news of the escape had been given to the office of his adjutant. I'm much obliged to your lordship. Now,
All diese Fluchten wurden jedes Mal verhältnismäßig rasch uns mitgeteilt. Zu Ihrer davor geäußerten Ausführung möchte ich nur die Stellung nehmen, dass es sich um Behauptung von Ihnen handelt, aber dass ich nach wie vor darauf bestehen bleibe, dass ich erst von dem Vorfall rückwirkend erfahren habe.
well, I've put my questions on the incident, and I pass to another point. I want to ask you just 2 or 3 questions about the evidence that you gave 2 days ago dealing with the evidence of your own witness, Herr Delleres. You remember that Herr Delleres made his first visit to London on the 25th of August 1939 after an interview and a telephone conversation with you on the 24th. I just want you to fix the date because it's sometimes difficult to remember what these dates are. At that time, you were anxious that he should persuade the British government to arrange a meeting of plenipotentiaries who would deal with the question of Danzig and the corridor. Is that right?
Das ist richtig.
You knew perfectly well, did you not, that as far as the Führer was concerned, Danzig and the corridor was not the real matter that was operating in his mind at all. So let me remind you of what he said on the 23rd of May. Danzig is not the subject of the dispute at all. It is a question of expanding our living space in the East and of securing our food supplies and of the settlement of the Baltic problem. You knew that, didn't you?
Ich wusste, dass das damals geäußert hatte, aber ich habe schon mehrfach darauf hingewiesen, wie derartige Besprechungen zu werten und im Zusammenhang mit der politischen Lage und Situation zu bringen waren. In diesem Augenblick der Verhandlungen mit England handelte es sich tatsächlich ausschließlich um Danzig und den Korridor.
Well, You say that despite what Hitler said on the 23rd of May, that at that moment Hitler was only concerned with dancing in the corridor? Do you say that seriously?
Das will ich allen Ernstes behaupten, dass dieses in den damaligen Situationen ausschließlich der Fall war. Sonst könnte man überhaupt keine hitlersche Aktion verstehen, denn dann könnte man ja sein Buch Mein Kampf als Grundlage nehmen und daraus alles und seine gesamten Handlungen rückschließen.
Well, I'm interested in the last week in August at the moment. I want you now just to remember 2 points. You sent Herr de Lerus to go in the morning of the 25th. You remember you had a telephone conversation with him at 11:30 on the 24th. On the 25th, were you sufficiently in Hitler's confidence to know that he was going to proffer the note verbal to Sir Neville Henderson, the British ambassador, on the 25th? Did you know that?
Ja, selbstverständlich.
At that time, when you were sending Herr de Lerus and the note verbal was being given to the British ambassador, the arrangement and order was that you were going to attack Poland on the morning of the 26th, wasn't it?
Zu diesem Zeitpunkt, in diesem Augenblick, war der Angriff auf Polen am 26. zurückgestellt. Am 25.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'll try again. Tell me if it comes over this time.
Am 25. war bereits die Absicht, am 26. morgens anzutreten.
Sir David, I think there's some difficulty. Oh, English and the Russian are coming together. Perhaps it'd be a good thing to adjourn now for a few minutes.
You had told me, witness, that the arrangement to attack Poland on the morning of the 26th was changed on the evening of the 25th. Before we come to that, I'll ask you 1 or 2 questions about that. What I was...
Nein, das habe ich
Wait
nicht
a moment,
erklärt.
just a moment. Well, sorry, that's what I understood you to say. But we'll come...
Nein, ich habe ausdrücklich erklärt, dass bereits am 25. der Angriff für den 26. morgens abgesagt war. Es ist ja auch technisch, militärisch nicht möglich, am Abend des 25. einen Großangriff einer ganzen Wehrmacht für den nächsten Morgen abzusagen. Das kürzeste Tempo hierfür ist mindestens 24, wenn nicht 48 Stunden. Ich habe ausdrücklich gesagt, am 25. war die Situation klar.
Well, at the time that you asked de Lerus to go to England on the 24th, it was still the order that the attack would take place on the 26th. Was not your object in sending de Lerus to have the British government discussing an offer of yours when the attack took place, in order to make it more difficult for the British government?
Nein, ich betone ja, ich müsste noch die Unterlage bitte bekommen wegen der Daten. Als ich zu diesem Zeitpunkt der Lehrer schickte und als zu diesem Zeitpunkt Sir Neville seitens des Führers Henderson eine Note gegeben wurde, war der Angriff vom 26. abgesagt und verschoben.
Well, let me remind you of what you said yourself on the 29th of August. On the day when England gave her official guarantee to Poland, that was 5:30 on the 25th of August, the Führer called me on the telephone and told me that he had stopped the planned invasion of Poland. I asked him then whether this was just temporary or for good. He said, no, I will have to see whether we can eliminate British intervention. So then I asked him, do you think that it will be any different within 4 or 5 days? Isn't that right?
Das habe ich so gesagt, aber ich habe nicht gesagt, dass das am 25. war, sondern als der Führer über die Garantie, dass sie gegeben würde, im Klaren war. Ich betone noch einmal, man kann nicht nachmittags um 5 Uhr...
That was what I was putting it to witness. The official guarantee to Poland was given, that is, the treaty was signed at 5:30 in the evening of the 25th of August. And I'm putting your own date to you, that was the time, it was after that, the Führer rang you up and told you the invasion was off. Do you wish to withdraw your statement that it was after the official guarantee was given to Poland?
Ich habe noch einmal betont, nachdem wir wussten, dass diese Garantie gegeben würde, es ist Ihnen ja doch selbstverständlich auch klar, dass wenn die Unterzeichnung am 25. um 5:30 Uhr nachmittags war, Sie frühestens der Führer etwas später, wenn es dieser Zeitpunkt wäre, hätte haben können, dann erst die Führer hätte zusammenrufen müssen, dass also frühestens in der Nacht des 25. zum 26. ein Angriff hätte abgeblasen werden müssen. Jeder militärische Sachverständige muss feststellen, dass das eine absolute Unmöglichkeit ist. Sondern gemeint in meiner Aussage war, als der Führer klar war, dass diese Garantie gegeben würde. Ich betone außerdem noch einmal, dass ich dieses Protokoll nicht gesehen, auch nicht beeidigt habe.
Well, now, I don't know if you were told about it. I don't know if you were in Hitler's confidence on this point or not. But wasn't the fact that Signor Attolico came on the 25th and told Hitler that the Italian army and air force were not ready for a campaign? Were you told that?
Das wurde mir selbstverständlich gesagt.
Yes. That was why the orders were cancelled for the attack on the 6th, wasn't it?
Nein, das ist unter keinen Umständen richtig. Denn mit der Einspringen der italienischen Hilfe war es so, dass sie von vielen sowieso bezweifelt wurde und schon in den ganzen Tagen der Spannung vorher es sichtbar war, durch ganz bestimmte Forderungen, die seitens der Italiener gestellt und zu erfüllen unsererseits unmöglich war, dass Italien dieser Situation ausweichen würde. Und es war die Überzeugung des Führers, dass das englische Garantieabkommen an Polen so klar nur deshalb abgeschlossen wurde, weil die englische Regierung unterdessen von der Haltung Italiens nicht als Bundesgenosse mitzumarschieren Kenntnis bekommen hatte.
Well, now, after that, I've put to you your own account of what the Führer said. I will have to see whether we can eliminate British intervention. Isn't it correct that you tried through Mr. Deleris in every way to try and eliminate British intervention.
Das habe ich ja doch zu keinem Augenblick bestritten. Es war doch meine ganze Absicht, nur den Krieg mit England zu vermeiden. Wenn dieser Krieg zu vermeiden gewesen wäre auf der Basis eines Arrangements mit Polen, so wäre das angenommen worden. Wenn der Krieg mit England zu vermeiden gewesen wäre, trotz eines Kriegs mit Polen, so war das auch meine Aufgabe. Geht am klarsten hervor, dass selbst nach Beginn des Polenkrieges, den 1. September, ich noch alle Anstrengungen machte, mit England keinen Krieg zu bekommen, die Kriegsausweitung zu verhindern.
In other words, what you were trying to do from the 25th onwards was to get England to try and agree and help the Reich in the return of Danzig and the Polish corridor. Wasn't that right?
Das ist selbstverständlich ganz klar ausgedrückt.
Now, you remember the interview with Mr. Deleris. I'll fix it by the time. It's the interview in which you colored the portions on the map. I'm not asking you about that. I only wanted to fix it in your mind. Because probably if I say that it's at the 11:30 on the 29th of August, that won't convey anything to you. But I want you to fix it. Just going to ask you one or two questions about that. You remember at that time that you were upset at the interview which had taken place when Hitler handed Henderson the German reply, and there had been the remark about the ultimatum. Remember that? There's nothing in...
Selbstverständlich war ich erregt,
Yeah.
weil das ja meine ganze Situation plötzlich sehr erheblich gestört hatte.
And is it correct, as Mr. Deleris says on page 72 of his book, that you came out with a tirade, strong words, against the Poles? If you remember, he quotes you as saying, "Wir kennen die Polen." Do you remember that?
Ja, selbstverständlich. Sie müssen die Lage damals bedenken. Ich hatte ja auch die Nachrichten von den Übergriffen und ich werde mich ja nicht hinstellen und dem neutralen Deleros sagen, hier steht Deutschland vollkommen schuldig, drüben sind vollständig unschuldige Polen. Sondern es war ja aus der Situation. Aber es ist richtig. Ich habe diese Äußerung getan.
Are you still an admirer of Bismarck?
Ich bewundere Bismarck absolut. Ich habe nicht behauptet, dass ich ein Bismarck bin.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I thought that you might have in mind his remark about the Poles. Do you remember? Haut doch die Polen, dass sie am Leben verzagen. Let us strike the Poles until they lose the courage to live. Was that what was in your mind at the time?
Nein, an solche Gedanken habe ich umso weniger gedacht, als ich jahrelang in aufrichtigem Bewusstsein die Freundschaft zu Polen gepflegt habe.
Well, now, you've been quite frank about your general intention, and I'm not going to take time on it. But I just want to put one or two subsidiary points. You remember the passage that I read from Mr. Deleris's book about the aeroplane and the sabotage, that he said that you had said to him, mentioning the defendant Ribbentrop. You remember that passage? Now, you've given your explanation, and I just want
Jawohl, ich habe die Erklärung
Yes.
hiervon völlig klar gegeben.
Now your explanation was that Herr de Leros was confusing your concern that his aeroplane should not be shot down in making his journey. That's putting your explanation fairly, isn't it? You are saying that Herr de Leros has confused what you were saying with your concern that his aeroplane should not be shot down. Isn't that right? That's as I understood it.
Nein, ich habe das, glaube ich, ganz klar zum Ausdruck gebracht. Wollen Sie es noch einmal? So kann ich es wiederholen. Ich habe gesagt, Herr de Leros hat hier selbst auf dem Zeugenstand die Worte gebraucht, ich muss mich korrigieren, als er angesprochen wurde auf Ribbentrop. Ich habe, spricht de Leros, die Kombination Ribbentrop gemacht, weil kurz vorher der Name fiel in einem anderen Zusammenhang. Und ich habe daraufhin erklärt, warum meine Sorge bezüglich, dass vielleicht was passieren könnte, gegeben war. Das habe ich ausführlich ausgeführt. Ich brauche es nicht mehr tun. Ich betone noch einmal, dass
That's what I was trying to put to you, witness. I think we're really agreed on it. That was what I was putting to you, that your anxiety was about his plane, and the point that I want to make clear to you now is that incident did not occur on this day when de Leros was preparing for his third visit, but occurred when he was in England and rang you up during his second visit. He rang you up on the evening of the 27th of August, and at page 59 of his book, he says, before leaving the Foreign Office, I telephoned to Goering to confirm that I was leaving for Berlin by plane at 7 p.m. He seemed to think this was rather late, it would be dark, and he was worried lest my plane be shot at by the British or over German territory. He asked me to hold the line, and a minute later came back and gave me a concise description of the route the plane must follow over Germany to avoid being shot at. He also assured me that the anti-aircraft stations along our course would be informed that we were coming. You see, what I'm suggesting to you is that your explanation is wrong, that you've confused it with this earlier incident to which Mr. de Leros speaks, and that Mr. de Leros is perfectly accurate when he speaks about the second incident which occurred 2 days later.
Das widerspricht einander durchaus nicht. Der erste Flug handelte sich darum, dass es schon bei Dunkelheit war, also eine ganz erhöhte Gefahr. Und bei dem zweiten betone ich noch einmal, hatte bereits die Kriegsbereitschaft aller Länder den Grad erreicht, dass das Fliegen bedenklich war. Und ich betone noch einmal, dass ich Herr de Leros auf die Frage meines Verteidigers korrigieren musste, dass ich ihm nicht gesagt habe, dass Ribbentrop einen Anschlag vorbereitet hätte. Und betone zum letzten Mal, dass Herr von Ribbentrop von meinen Verhandlungen mit de Leros nichts gewusst hat.
Do you really say that? Do you remember that on the 29th of August, first of all, on the 28th of August, at 10:30 p.m., when Henderson and Hitler had an interview, that was before the difficulties arose, was when the interview when the Hitler was considering direct negotiations with the Poles. He said, we must summon Field Marshal Goering to discuss it with him. That is in our Blue Book, and as far as I know, has never been denied. You were summoned to the interview that Hitler and Ribbentrop were having with Sir Neville Henderson. And according to Mr.
Nein, ich muss unterbrechen. der Führer sagt, wir müssen ihn holen. Ich bin aber nicht geholt worden. Das sagt auch das Blaubuch nicht.
But didn't you, according to Mr. Deleris, he says, during our conversation, Goering described how he had been summoned to Hitler immediately after Henderson's departure. How Hitler, Goering and Ribbentrop had discussed the conference with Henderson, and how discussed the conference that had taken place with Henderson, and how satisfied all three of them were with the result. In this connection, Hitler had turned to Ribbentrop and said mockingly, "Do you still believe that Deleris is a British agent?" Somewhat acidly, Ribbentrop replied that perhaps it was not the case. Would you say that that's not true either?
Herr Deleros schildert diese Dinge, ohne dabei gewesen zu sein. Auch aus dieser Schilderung geht hervor, dass ich erst nach Henderson gekommen bin. Diese Schilderung ist etwas farbig. Ribbentrop hat keine Ahnung gehabt, was ich mit Deleros verhandelte, und der Führer hat ihn auch in diese Verhandlungen nicht eingeweiht. Er wusste nur, dass ich an sich Deleros als Unterhändler hatte und war selbstverständlich gegen ihn eingestellt, aus diesem Grunde, weil er als Außenminister nicht angenehm berührt war, dass ein unmittelbar anderer Weg noch lief.
That was exactly the point, you know, that I put to you about 7 minutes ago, that Ribbentrop did know you were using Deleris, and with which you disagreed. You now agree that he did know you were using Deleris. So I'll leave it.
Nein, verzeihen Sie, ich sage auch jetzt noch, bitte wollen Sie meine Worte nicht entstellen, dass Ribbentrop nicht gewusst hat, was ich mit Deleros verhandelte und nicht einmal durch den Führer erfahren hat.
Now, you said distort my words. I especially did not say to you that he knew what you were negotiating about. I said to you that he knew you were using Deleris, and that you agree is right. I limited it to that, isn't that? And that is right, isn't it?
Er wusste auch nicht, dass ich durch Deleros in diesem Augenblick mit England verhandelte. Auch von den Flügen wusste er nichts.
Now, I want you just to help me on one or two other matters. You remember that in January of 1937 and in October in 1937, the German government gave the strongest assurances as to the inviolability and neutrality of Belgium and Holland. Do you remember that?
Ich erinnere mich im Einzelnen nicht daran, sie sind aber hier vorgetragen worden.
And do you remember that on the 25th of August 1938, a memorandum on the assumption that France and Great Britain, that France would declare war during the case the Fall Gruen, and that Great Britain would come in. Do you remember that? It's PS 375, United States Exhibit 84. I only want you to have it generally in mind because I'm going to put the passage to you.
Darf ich nur bitten, ob die Unterschrift Volta lautet?
I'll let you know. Yes, that's the one.
Dann erinnere ich mich an das Schriftstück genau, weil es mir hier vorgelegt worden ist.
That is right. I only wanted to recall your recollection to one sentence. Belgium and the Netherlands, in German hands, represent an extraordinary advantage in the prosecution of the air war against Great Britain as well as against France. Therefore, it is held to be essential to obtain the opinion of the army as to the conditions under which an occupation of this area could be carried out and how long it would take. Remember that? It's a pretty obvious air strategy, but you remember
Das
the point.
ist absolut korrekt. Es handelt sich um die Hauptarbeit eines Generalstabshauptmanns der 5. Abteilung des Generalstabs, der von sich aus als die Nachrichtenabteilung selbstverständlich die besten Positionen in seinen Exposés vorzuschlagen hat.
Yeah. Then, after that, on the 28th of April 1939, you remember that Hitler said that he had given binding declarations to a number of states, and this applies to Holland and Belgium. I think that was the time when he made a speech in the Reichstag and mentioned a number of small states as well as that, but he said that they included Holland and Belgium.
Das ist ja hier wiederholt vorgetragen.
Yes. Now, do you remember at on the 23rd of May, the document that I've already put to you, that's the meeting of the Reich at the Reich Chancellery, that Hitler said this: the Dutch and Belgian air bases must be occupied by armed force. Declarations of neutrality must be ignored. Remember him saying that?
Das steht da drin, ja.
And on the 22nd of August 1939, in the speech to the Commanders-in-Chief, which is 798 PS, United States 29, he said, another possibility is the violation of Dutch, Belgian, and Swiss neutrality. I have no doubt that all these states, as well as Scandinavia, will defend their neutrality by all available means. England and France will not violate the neutrality of these countries. Remember him saying that?
Sie sehen ja selbst daraus, wie oft der Führer hier seine Ansichten änderte, sodass auch die von vorher vom Mai eine durchaus nicht festlegende war.
Oh, no, they're perfectly consistent. In May he's saying they must be occupied, declarations of neutrality must be ignored, and in August he's emphasizing by saying that England and France will not violate the neutrality. So it was perfectly easy for Germany to do it. On the
Nein, spricht da auch, dass auch von unserer Seite deshalb keine Notwendigkeit besteht. Ich wollte nur darauf aufmerksam machen, dass die Situationen sich politisch immer anders ergeben und wir ja auch bei diesen Verhören und diesem Prozess die welthistorischen Hintergrund der politischen Dinge betrachten müssen.
Well, that was on the 22nd. You've agreed as to what was said. Immediately after that, on the 26th, 4 days later, Hitler gave another assurance. Remember that? Just before the war, he gave another assurance.
Ja.
And on the 6th of October, 1939, he gave a further assurance. And on the 7th of October, the day after that last assurance, the order, which is 2329 PS, GB 105, was issued. Army Group B has to make all preparations according to special orders for immediate invasion of Dutch and Belgian territory if the political situation so demands. And on the 9th of October, there is a directive from Hitler. Preparations should be made for offensive action on the northern flank of the Western Front, crossing the area of Luxembourg, Belgium, and Holland. This attack must be carried out as soon and as forcibly as possible. Isn't it quite clear from that all along you knew, as Hitler stated, on the 22nd of August that England and France would not violate the neutrality of the Low Countries, and you were prepared to violate them whenever it suited your strategical and tactical interests. Isn't that quite clear?
Nicht so vollständig, sondern wenn die politische Lage es erfordert. Und mittlerweile waren ja die Einflüge Englands über die Neutralität Hollands und Belgiens erfolgt bis zum Oktober.
Well, if you say not quite completely, that's as near agreement with me as you're probably prepared to go. Now I want to ask you just quite shortly again on Yugoslavia. You remember that you've told us in your evidence in chief that Germany before the beginning of the war, had the very best relations with the Yugoslav people, and that you yourself had contributed to it. I'm putting it quite shortly.
Das ist richtig.
Yes. And that was emphasized, if you'll remember, on the 1st of June 1939 by a speech of Hitler at a dinner with Prince Paul.
Jawohl.
Now, 80 days after that, on the 12th of August 1939, the defendant Ribbentrop, Hitler, and Ciano had a meeting. You give me GB8, eh? No, TC77, GB48. And just let me recall to you what Hitler said at that meeting to Count Ciano. Generally speaking...
Verzeihung, aus welchem Dokument?
I'm sorry, it was my fault. TC77, GB48. It's the memorandum of a conversation between Hitler, Ribbentrop, and Ciano at Obersalzberg on the 12th of August.
Ja, ich wollte nur wissen, ein Memorandum oder aus dem Tagebuch Cianos. Das ist für mich wichtig.
Oh, no, not from Ciano's diary. It's a memorandum. Oh, no, this is the official report. Generally speaking, the best thing to happen would be for the neutrals to be liquidated one after the other. This process would be carried out more easily if on every occasion one partner of the Axis covered the other while it was dealing with an uncertain neutral. Italy might well regard Yugoslavia as a neutral of this kind. That was rather inconsistent with your statement as to the good intentions towards Yugoslavia and the Führer's statement to Prince Paul, wasn't it?
Ich müsste noch einmal das genau durchlesen, in welchem Gesamtzusammenhang die Äußerung hier gefallen ist. So wie sie hier vorgetragen ist, passt sie selbstverständlich nicht dazu.
Just one moment. As it is, it wouldn't. You know, I don't want to stop you unnecessarily in any way, but that document's been read at least twice in the trial, and any further matter perhaps you'll consider, but you'll agree that unless, that is, I have wrenched it out of its context, which I hope I haven't, that is quite inconsistent with friendly intentions, isn't it?
Ich sage ja, das stimmt nicht damit überein.
Yeah. Now, that was the 56 days after that, on the 6th of October, Hitler gave an assurance to Yugoslavia. He said, immediately after the completion of the Anschluss, I informed Yugoslavia that from now on, the frontier with this country would also be an unalterable one, and that we only desired to live in peace and friendship with her. And then again in March 1941, on the entry of the Tripartite Pact, the German government announced that it confirmed its determination to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Yugoslavia at all times. Now, after that, of course, as I've always said when I've dealt with this, there was the Simovic putsch in Yugoslavia. But I think you said, I want to get it quite clear, you said quite frankly in your evidence that Hitler and yourself never took the trouble or thought of taking the trouble of inquiring whether the Simovic government would preserve the neutrality or not. That is right, isn't it?
So habe ich das nicht gesagt, sondern wir waren überzeugt, dass sie diese Erklärungen nur zur Täuschung abgegeben hat. Denn wir wussten ja, dass der Putsch einerseits von Moskau geleitet und andererseits, wie ich auch später erfahren habe, finanziell in außerordentlichem Umfang von England unterstützt worden war. Und daraus hatten wir die feindliche Absicht erkannt. Aus der sofortigen Mobilisierung der jugoslawischen Armee ging alles klar hervor. Durch das, was Herr Simovic erklärte, wünschten wir uns nicht täuschen zu lassen.
Well, I'll just perhaps say one word about the mobilization in a moment. But on the 27th of March, it was 2 days after the signature that I've just referred to, there was a conference in Berlin of Hitler with the German High Command at which you were present. And do you remember the Führer saying this? The Führer is determined, without waiting for possible loyalty declarations of the new government, to make all preparations in order to destroy Yugoslavia, militarily and as a national unit. No diplomatic inquiries will be made, nor ultimatums presented. Assurances of the Yugoslav government, which cannot be trusted anyhow in the future, will be taken note of. The attack will start as soon as means and troops suitable for it are ready. Politically, it is especially important that the blow against Yugoslavia is carried out with unmerciful harshness, and that the military destruction is done in a lightning-like undertaking. The plan assumes that we speed up the schedules of all preparations and use such strong forces that the Yugoslav collapse will take place within the shortest possible time. Wasn't a very friendly intention towards Yugoslavia to have no diplomatic negotiations, not give them the chance of assurance or coming to terms with you, and to strike with unmerciful harshness? Was it?
Ich habe ja eben bedeutet, dass nach dem Simovic-Putsch wir uns über die Situation restlos klar waren und jedes Manöver Jugoslawiens nur als ein Zeitmanöver angesehen haben. Nach dem Putsch war Jugoslawien endgültig in die feindliche Front übergegangen. Und es galt nun auch unsererseits, Täuschungsmanöver zu machen, um schnellstens zum Aufmarsch zu gelangen, weil nur verhältnismäßig hierfür schwache Kräfte in diesem Augenblick bereitstanden.
You realize, of course, that you said that General Simovic was inspired by Moscow. I'm not going to argue that point with you at all, but I do point out to you that this was 3 months before you were at war with the Soviet Union. You realize that, do you?
Richtig. Gerade dieser Simovic-Putsch hat beim Führer die letzten Bedenken weggeräumt, dass Russland sich feindlich gegen Deutschland eingestellt habe. Und gerade der Simovic-Putsch war der letzte Anlass zu seinem Entschluss, so bald wie möglich das Präveniere gegen diese Gefahr zu spielen. Zum Zweiten war uns ja die sehr starke finanzielle...
Now just pause there for a moment. Do you know that it appears in the documents quite clearly that the attack on the Soviet Union was postponed for 6 weeks because of this trouble in the Balkans? That's quite inconsistent with what you are saying now, isn't it?
Nein. Wenn Sie meine Ausführungen zu diesem Punkt noch einmal durchlesen, so habe ich gesagt, dass sehr viele Momente auf der russischen Seite den Führer bewogen haben, einen Aufmarsch zu befehlen, dass er aber sich die letzte Entscheidung, ob es dazu zum Eingreifen kommen sollte, vorbehielt und dass nach dem Simovic-Putsch diese Entscheidung gefallen war, dass selbstverständlich nun eine politische Entscheidung bei ihm militärisch eine Verzögerung eingetreten ist durch den Kampf mit Jugoslawien, ergibt sich aus der rein strategischen Situation.
Now, I want to ask you on one other point about Yugoslavia. You remember your evidence that the attack on Belgrade was due to the fact that it contained the War Office and a number of other important military organizations. Remember, I'm trying to summarize it, but that was the effect of your evidence, wasn't it? Yeah. Now, do you remember how it was put in Hitler's order, which I've just been reading to you? The main task of the Air Force is to start as early as possible with the destruction of the Yugoslav Air Force ground installations. Now I ask you to note the next word, and to destroy the capital of Belgrade in attacks by waves. Besides, the Air Force has to support the defense of the army. I put it to you that order makes clear that the attack on Belgrade was just another of the exhibitions of terror attacks in order to attempt to subdue a population that would have difficulty in resisting them.
Nein, das ist nicht richtig. Die Bevölkerung hat sich gewehrt und Belgrad ist vielmehr das Zentrum aller militärischen Dinge gewesen, wie es vielleicht sonst die Hauptstadt eines anderen Landes war. Darauf bitte ich Ihr Augenmerk zu lenken.
Well, now, I'm going to pass from that matter to one or two points on which you gave evidence, I think at the instance of Council for the Organizations. You remember you gave evidence in answer to Dr. Barnell about the Waffen-SS, the Waffen-SS. Remember that on a few days ago? I'd just like you to look at a document which hasn't got a number, but it's in the Führer's ideas about the Waffen-SS, and see if you agree. Look at the... What's it? D665. Oh, it's D665, and it will be Exhibit GB 280. See, it's a document from the High Command of the Army, General Staff of the Army, statements of the Führer re future of state military police. And the preliminary document says that doubts have arisen as to whether, when the Führer's ideas on the Waffen-SS were passed on some time ago, it was intended that they should be given wider publicity. And then if you'd pass to the document, perhaps you'd follow it while I read it, because I don't think it's been in before. On the 6th of August, 1940, on the occasion of the order for the organization of the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler bodyguard, The Führer stated the principles regarding the necessity for the existence of the Waffen-SS as summed up below. The Greater German Reich in its final form will not include within its frontiers nothing but national entities who are right from the beginning well disposed towards the Reich. It is therefore necessary to maintain, outside the core of the Reich, a state military police capable of representing and imposing the authority of the Reich within the country in any situation. This task can be carried out only by a state police which has within its ranks men of the best German blood and which identifies itself unreservedly with the ideology at the base of the great German Reich. Only a formation comprised in this way will resist disintegrating influences even in critical times. Such a formation, proud of its purity, will never fraternize with the proletariat and with the underworld which undermines the fundamental idea. But further, our future greater German Reich, a body of police, will only have the necessary authority over its compatriots if it is trained along military lines. Our people are so military minded as a result of glorious events of a warlike nature and indoctrination by the National Socialist Party that a sock-knitting police, as in 1848, or a bureaucratized police, as in 1918, can no longer prevail. It is therefore necessary for this state police to prove its worth and provide sacrifices of blood at the front in closed formations in the same way as every unit of the armed forces. Having returned home in the ranks of the army, after having proved themselves in the field, the units of the Waffen-SS will possess the authority to execute their tasks as state police. The utilization of the Waffen-SS in the interior is just as much in the interests of the Wehrmacht itself. We must never again tolerate in the future that the German Wehrmacht, based on universal conscription, should be used against its own compatriots, arm in hand, when critical situations arise in the interior. Such a step is the beginning of the end. A state which has to resort to such methods is no longer in a position to use its armed forces against an enemy from without, and therefore surrenders itself. Our history contains sad examples of this. The Wehrmacht in future is intended for all time for use solely against the Reich's foreign enemies. In order to ensure that the quality of the men in the units of the Waffen-SS always remains high, the organization of the units must remain limited. The Führer sees this limitation in the facts that the units of the Waffen-SS should in general not exceed 5 to 10% of the peacetime strength of the army. Do you agree with that? As a statement, is that a correct description of the purpose of the Waffen-SS?
Da bin ich absolut überzeugt, dass das gesagt hat. Aber das steht nicht im Widerspruch zu meiner Aussage.
Well, now, I just want you, while we're on the SS, to deal with, to look at a note which is document D729, this is a new document, which will be GB 28281. It's an conversation between you and the Duce in the Palazzo Venezia on the 23rd of October 1942. At that time you were still in good odor with the Führer and still retained your power, isn't that right? I'll read it. The Reichsmarschall, you got it, it's page 35, paragraph 1. The Reichsmarshal then described Germany's method in fighting the partisans. To begin with, the entire livestock and all foodstuff is taken away from the areas concerned, so as to deny the partisans all sources of food.
Ein Augenblick. Wo steht das?
It should be, it's page 35, paragraph 1, but perhaps I'll find it for you if you're any difficulty.
Yeah.
I think it's marked, and it begins the Reichsmarschall. You find it?
Jawohl.
Yes. Well, then I'll start again, if I may. The Reichsmarschall then described Germany's method in fighting the partisans. To begin with, the entire livestock and all foodstuff is taken away from the areas concerned, so as to deny the partisans all sources of food. Men and women are taken away to labor camps, the children to children's camps, and the villages burnt down. Thus, for example, had the railways in the vast wooded areas of Bialowice been safeguarded. Should attacks occur, then the entire male population of villages would be lined up on one side and the women on the other side. The women would be told that all the men would be shot unless they, the women, indicated which of the men did not belong to the village. In order to save their men, the women always pointed out the stranger. Germany had experienced that, generally speaking, soldiers were no use in carrying out such measures. Members of the party discharged this task much more harshly and efficiently. For the same reason, armies that were strengthened by a political creed, such as the German or the Russian, fought much more energetically than others. The SS, the guard of the old fighters of the party, who have personal ties with the Führer and who form a special elite, confirm this principle. Now, is that a correct description?
Jawohl.
Of the correct,
Dem Sinne nach korrekt.
and this expresses correctly your views on how war against partisans should be carried out.
Ich habe dies übermittelt.
Now,
Ein Moment. Darf ich die Nummer dieses Dokuments bitten?
yes, I'll give you it again. It was D/728, and it becomes, I'm sorry, D/729, and it becomes GB281. Now, I just want you to help me on one other matter on these organizations. You'll remember that in answer, I think, to Dr. Servatius, you made some remarks about the leadership corps. Remember that? I just want you to have them in mind. Now, would you look at the document which will be presented to you, which will be document D/728 GB282. This is a document from the party Gau leadership of Hessen-Nassau, and it's obviously quite late on. I'm sorry. There's a reference to an order of the party chancellery dated the 10th of February 1945, and its subject is action by the party to keep Germans in check until the end of the war. And it's signed by Sprenger, the Gauleiter and Kommissar for Reich Defense. I request the
Das
Christ...
Datum ist 15. März 45, nicht wahr?
I'm grateful to you. I know it's just after the 10th of March. It's quite late on. I hadn't got it on my copy, but if you say that, I'll take that from
45.
you. 45.
45 Jahre.
45, yes. I request the Kreisleiters to discuss the following with the Ortsgruppenleiters at the next official discussion, and simultaneously draw attention hereby to the need for secrecy and radical action in these measures. Every German must be subjected to strict supervision regarding his political firmness and willpower. If during this supervision weaklings are found, Germans who perhaps have or might have the idea that we are losing the war or that the best thing would be to stop fighting, these Germans are to be given fresh strength and faith in Adolf Hitler is to be aroused in them again. If Germans who are found who spread the story that we have lost the war, I'm going too quickly, lost the war, and that we are on the brink, this rumor is to be countered with all available means. The Kreisleiters are to have these Germans reported to them and are to ask the Gestapo to arrest them according to the position of the rumor. I consider an occasional arrest or the transfer of some Germans to concentration camps as the best method of eliminating such rumor mongers. The Ortsgruppenleiter must without fail keep all Germans in check and without fail see to it that they all keep a stiff upper lip to the end, because if courage and anger against the enemy fail behind the front... I'm sorry. Am I going too fast? Right. We shall lose the war. It is clear to me that our enemies are crossing the Rhine and entering Aargau too, but they will not conquer the whole of Greater Germany, and above all, not National Socialism. 6. The Kreisleiters are given strict and secret orders to withdraw on the approach of the enemy in every area to the center of Greater Germany. All files, especially the secret ones, are to be destroyed completely. The secret files about post-war reconstruction, purges among party members, and I ask you to note the next two lines. The administration, enlargement, installations, and deterring work in the concentration camps must be destroyed at all costs. Also, the extermination of some families, etc. These files must under no circumstances fall into the hands of the enemy, since they were, after all, secret orders by the Führer. I also hereby give the order that Germans who do not defend themselves in the approach of the enemy or who wish to flee are to be shot down ruthlessly or, where suitable, hanged to frighten the population. Now, the other page is to the Kreisleiters, county leaders, and is a discussion about measures to be carried out. The first deals with the people who've got tuberculosis and heart diseases, about them not producing families. I'm not going to read that in full. The second paragraph deals with the work and jobs for party members, but I'd just like you to look at numbers 3 and 4. 3, legal proceedings. No party member may be brought before a court. In case of criminal proceedings, these are to be conducted by the Kreisleitungen. Party members are to be got off under all circumstances, even when they are inculpated. The good reputation of the party must under no circumstances be stained publicly, as the party is and remains a model. It is always the non-party members who are to be inculpated. To the eyes of foreigners, one must always show a solid party, which can never be split up and whose leadership corps and party members are unity itself. Now, food supply. The Führer has again pointed out that the special weekly food ration cards are to be used in strict secrecy, and that the supplies are always to be bought at different places. The cards will in future be distributed by the Gauleiter. Further weekly increases for the party leadership are coming into force shortly. Meat approximately 1250 grams, fat approximately 500 grams. Ortsgruppenleiters, who are not down as self-providers, can also send in requests to the Kreisleitungen. I again point out the need for strict secrecy.
Rechtsanwalt Stamer für den Angeklagten Goering. Der Verwertung dieser Urkunde habe ich zu widersprechen, weil ich ihre Echtheit nicht anerkennen kann. Ich habe das Original noch nicht gesehen. Die Zweifel an der Echtheit werden insbesondere daraus hergeleitet, dass hier eine Reihe von Ausdrücken verwendet sind, die in der deutschen Sprache völlig ungewöhnlich sind.
Ja, ich wollte dieselben Einwendungen machen. Es ist kein Original. Ich wollte dieselben Einwendungen machen. Es handelt sich um kein Original, sondern darüber steht Abschrift und kein Originalunterschrift, sondern mit Schreibmaschine steht drunter Sprenger Gauleiter.
Es wird hier zum Beispiel der Ausdruck gebraucht, Gerichtlichkeiten. Das ist in der deutschen Sprache ein völlig ungewöhnlicher und bekannter Ausdruck. Ich kann mir nicht denken, dass in einem amtlichen Schreiben, das wirklich von einem Gauleiter herausgegeben wird, eine solche Bezeichnung verwendet worden wäre.
Ich kann auf einen weiteren Punkt hinweisen, dass es sich hier um scheinbar kein Originaldokument handelt, denn von dieser Erhöhung für die Führerschaft oder sonst wie von Fleisch und Fett hätte ich etwas erfahren müssen. Kein einziges Wort dieser beiden Dokumente ist mir bekannt. Es ist auch nicht abgestempelt. Alles ist nur Schreibmaschinenschrift, einschließlich der Unterschriften. Ich kann daher dieses Dokument nicht anerkennen.
Well, this is a file.
No doubt, David. I'll tell you when it was captured.
This is a file copy, which, to the best of my knowledge, was captured at the office of, as it says, of the Gau leadership. Yes, it was sent to us by the British Army of the Rhine. I shall make inquiries about it, but it purports to be a file copy, and I've put the original to the copy, the original document that we have, which is a file copy, to the witness.
Ja, ja. Also hier das Rückführkeit.
Dr. Starmer, I have the original document in my hands now, together with the certificate of an officer of the British Army stating that the document was delivered to him in the above capacity in the ordinary course of official business as the original of a document found in German archives, records and files captured by military forces under the command of the Supreme Commander. In those circumstances, it is in exactly the same position as all the other captured documents. You, of course, can bring any evidence which you think right to criticize the authenticity of the document. The document stands on exactly the same footing as the other captured documents, subject to any criticism which you may be able to bring evidence to support.
Witness, I want you to deal with the sentence in paragraph 6. The administration, enlargement, and installations and deterring work in the concentration camps must be destroyed at all costs. Also, the extermination of some families, etc. These files must under no circumstances fall into the hands of the enemy, since they were, after all, secret orders by the Führer. Now that is a document which is going, that paragraph is going down certainly to Kreisleiters, who are counted leaders of the Nazi Party. And it assumes that they knew all about the running of concentration camps. And are you telling the tribunal that you, who up to 1943 were the second man in the Reich, knew nothing about concentration camps?
In erster Linie erwähne ich noch einmal, dass ich dieses Dokument nicht anerkenne, dass ich dieses Dokument in seiner ganzen Fassung nicht kenne und auch dieser Paragraph mir völlig unmöglich erscheint. Ich habe den Umfang und die Art, wie es in den Konzentrationslagern später nach meiner Zeit zuging, nicht gewusst.
Well, now, just let me remind you of the evidence that has been given before this court, that as far as Auschwitz alone is concerned, that 4 million people were exterminated. Remember that?
Das habe ich nur als Behauptungen hier gehört. Für mich ist es keinesfalls erwiesen, diese Zahl.
And you remember, then let me give it to you from, if you don't consider it proved, let me remind you of the affidavit of Hertels, who was the deputy group leader of the foreign section, of the security section of Amt 4 of the RSHA. He says that approximately 4 million Jews had been killed in the concentration camps, while an additional 2 million met death in other ways. Assume that these figures, one is a Russian figure, the other is the German figure. Assume that they're even 50% correct, that after all it's both sides. Assume that it was 2 million and 1 million. Are you telling this tribunal that a minister with your power in the Reich could remain ignorant that that was going on?
Das behaupte ich, und gerade deshalb, weil das so war, wurden vor mir diese Sachen geheim gehalten. Ich bin sogar der Meinung, dass nicht einmal der Führer annähernd von diesem Ausmaß etwas gewusst hat. Das spricht auch dafür, dass Himmler diese Sachen außerordentlich geheim gehalten hat. Es sind uns niemals Zahlen oder irgendwie in dieser Richtung etwas zugestellt worden.
But witness, hadn't you access to the foreign press, or a press department in your ministry, to foreign broadcasts? See, there is evidence that altogether, when you take the Jews and other people, something like 10 million people have been done to death in cold blood, apart from those who were killed in battle. Something like 10 million people. You said that you never saw or heard from the foreign press and broadcasts that this was going on?
Erstens mal ist mir die Zahl 10 Millionen in keiner Weise erwiesen. Zum Zweiten habe ich während des ganzen Krieges keine Auslandspresse gelesen, weil ich das doch nur für Propaganda gehalten habe. Zum an sich berechtigt, für meine Person Auslandssender zu hören, habe sie aber niemals benutzt, weil ich ebenfalls diese Propaganda nicht hören wollte. Ich habe auch inländische Propaganda nicht angehört.
Well, now,
Erst in den letzten 4 Tagen des Krieges habe ich zum ersten Mal, und das könnte ich unter Beweis stellen, den Auslandssender eingeschaltet.
Did you told Mr. Justice Jackson yesterday that you had your that there were various representatives in Eastern territories, and you've seen the films of the concentration camps, haven't you, since this trial started? You know that there were millions of garments, millions of shoes, 20,952 kilograms of gold wedding rings, 35 wagons of furs, all that stuff which these people who were exterminated at Majdanek or Auschwitz left behind them. Did nobody ever tell you under the development of the 4-year plan, or anyone else, that they were getting all these amounts of human material? Remember, we heard from the Polish Jewish gentleman who gave evidence that all he got back from his family, of his wife and his mother and his daughter, I think, were their identity cards. His work was to gather up their clothes. And he told us that so thorough were the henchmen of your friend Himmler that the women took 5 minutes extra to kill because they had to have their hair cut off in order to make mattresses. Remember that, witness? Was nothing ever told to you about this accretion to German material which came from the effects of these people who were murdered?
Nein, und wie stellen Sie sich bitte das vor? Ich habe die großen Richtlinien für die deutsche Wirtschaft gegeben. Dazu gehörte nicht das Matratzen oder sonst wie Anfertigung von Frauenhaaren oder die Verwendung alter Schuhe und Kleider. Ich lasse mal die Zahl vollständig dahingestellt. Ich möchte auch hier einen Einspruch gegen Ihren Ausdruck erheben, mein Freund Himmler.
Well, you choose the word. I'll say your enemy, Himmler, or I'll say simply Himmler, whichever you like. You know who I mean, don't you?
Jawohl.
Now, I just want to remind you of one other point. On the 14th of April 1943, the defendant Zaukel wrote to Hitler, 407 VPS, United States Exhibit 228. I have the honor to report to you that 3,638,056 new foreign workers have been added to the German war economy between April 1st last year and March 31st of this year. Besides the foreign civilian workers, another 1,622,829 prisoners of war are employed in the German economy. Now just listen to this. Out of the 5 million foreign workers who arrived in Germany, not even 200,000 came voluntarily. That's the minutes of the Central Planning Board on the 1st of March. Do you say that you, in your position in the state, and as the great architect of German economy, didn't know that you were getting for your economy 4,800,000 foreign workers who were forced to come? Do you tell the tribunal that?
Ich habe niemals dem Gericht das gesagt. Ich habe gesagt, dass ich genau weiß, dass diese Arbeiter hereingeholt wurden, und zwar nicht immer freiwillig. Ob die Zahl 200.000 stimmt, weiß ich nicht. Ob die Zahl 200.000 freiwillig stimmt, weiß ich nicht. Ich glaube sie auch nicht. Die freiwillige Zahl war höher, aber das ändert nichts an der Tatsache, dass auch die Arbeiter unter Zwangsauflagen in das Reich geholt wurden. Habe ich nicht bestritten und habe ich auch verantwortet.
You admit, I want to put it quite fairly, that a large number of workers were forced to come to the Reich and work there.
Jawohl.
Sir David, would you like to adjourn now?
Yes, and I shall be a very short time longer, but it'll just give me time to finish it.
2 o'clock.
Hello, recording. Hello, recording. They're adjourning until 2 o'clock.